Hello and welcome to lecture number 9 on Baroque and Rococo. When we left off, we remember that the Renaissance was a movement of new knowledge after the Middle Ages that was very focused on balance, harmony, and order. And by the end of the Renaissance period, it evolved to mannerism, which was so obsessed with graceful, elegant, sinuous lines that it sort of went beyond what was possible for realism, especially in portraiture and things like that. With Baroque and Rococo, which would come just a little bit later, they were reactions to how simple and neutral and clean everything was with like Palladian Renaissance architecture. And it was also a time when the church was reacting to Protestantism and other movements that were going on with a weapon of incredible awe and surprise in architecture by using huge amounts of detail. And so that's what Baroque is. It's reactionary from Palladianism. It is the church's effort to make everything more and even more. And it is also an evolution of mannerism, where the use of the overly elegant line sort of fractals out and becomes even more convoluted. And the word Baroque was originally used as an insult. If we remember how Gothic was originally an insult, Baroque comes from the Italian word barocco, which meant convoluted or contorted and described an obstacle to logical thought. And so our first keyword is Baroque. And so that is the deal with Baroque, is that it's a highly decorative and over-the-top style from the 17th century. Those are the reasons that it came into existence, and the way that it manifested was because of the, by this point, absolutely immense wealth of the Catholic Church, which all of Europe's civilization had far eclipsed to the scope and complexity of what they had for so long tried to emulate from the classical period coming out of Rome and Greece. So that is Baroque, but let's look at a few of the pictures. It's not just that the incredible complexity of detail and organic shapes here. You can see it's a very clear departure from the clean lines of the Renaissance that we were looking at before, and another shrinking down of the overall scope of elements. So you can see the pilasters here are nearly flat to the wall. It was an interior and an exterior style, as well as for furniture, sculpture, and art. And it had many different iterations, but overall, when you see this level of detail, you're going to know right away that we're dealing with Baroque or Rococo, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Rococo was just late Baroque, or like the most Baroque. But it could involve many different color patterns, but it was, in a sense, an attempt to be as opulent as possible with the finest, most expensive of everything, and the most complex of shape, from columns to capitals to decor to everything in between. Here are some tables from the Baroque period. As you can see, the decor and the ornamentation is becoming the thing itself. The structure of these tables is in fact decorative, and that is the hallmark difference between Rococo and Baroque. Here is a Baroque fireplace, and we can see that not just are the pieces between elements filled with decor, as we have seen up until now, but rather that the decor itself is coming out of the spaces between elements, covering elements, and becoming elements themselves. So Rococo, as I said, is just taking that to the furthest degree. Rococo in particular is to abandon symmetry in favor of organic shapes. There's an obsession with the graceful curves and enormous quantities of detail and ornamental moldings. Lots of volutes and decorative embellishments, pastel colors. There's absolutely no limit to how complex and how decorative this was. And in all of human history, Baroque leading up to Rococo is the moment where we find how decorative and gold and flashy can something be before it ticks back over into tacky from being classy, because this was the utmost. And even this, or certainly any more, a debate for the ages, but what exactly defines tacky? But we had to find it first in human history to explore that, and this is where we found the line. So furthermore, in Rococo, there's no distinction between the structure and the decoration. The ornament could be structural, and that's what I was talking about before. In the picture right above my head, you can see a sincere use of asymmetry, going for, like, this could be the silhouette of an animal or something. Much more important than expressing it's a man-made thing by including symmetry or mathematical shape. This is the opposite of that. That something could be both of those things. And here again, in both of these pictures, we see a Rococo sense of the decor itself becoming the structure of the thing. And so the decor became so important that the structure began to change for it. We see round walls, we see niches and things existing exclusively for the purpose of holding something whose sole job is ornamentation. And here, furthermore, we see they went in search of more new motifs. We see a lot of clamshells. We see going back to the Solomonic columns, lots of twisted columns, as we talked about several lectures ago. Going back into the classical period and finding absolutely anything that you could pull forward. Now, not because Rome was a strong society or because it was all mathematically pure and balanced, just because we're looking for, decorative stuff to copy and just to be elaborate, decor on top of decor on top of decor, to the point that if you look at this picture on the right, it looks like some sort of encrusted seashell or coral reef where the level of complexity has completely obscured the shape of the building itself. Where are the columns? Where are the arches? You sort of get a sense of their space, but they're no longer proud of their keystones and their voussoirs, but rather the whole thing is just basically bejeweled. And this could be exterior and interior, and this entire niche and this whole part of this wall has been designed exclusively to house a piece of art. And as I said, this was huge in furniture as well. We see some marquetry here, which we talked about in the Renaissance, but they have gone to the trouble of doing all of this gorgeous marquetry, and then they have tacked on this gilded statuary in medium relief. Very interesting. Scroll work is one of the key ways, if I can move out of the way, scroll work is one of the key ways that they got to their level of elaborateness that they were looking for. So scroll work is simply ornamentation characterized by spirals and incomplete circles, often resembling edge-on views of rolled paper or plant-like vines with foliage attached. So here we see something that really will enable Art Nouveau, which is coming down the line, which is one of the most beautiful styles of all time. And for the Baroque and Rococo practitioners, their goal was to encrust things with as much detail as possible. And that's not really true of Art Nouveau, but this use of asymmetrical sinuous lines, both from scrolls and from vinous plant work, that's going to enable the Art Nouveau practitioners who are coming soon. And scroll work could be not just vinous, but it could be all of this elaborate, like, what is this supposed to represent? Is this supposed to be plant life? Is it supposed to be, it starts to have no real basis in reality. How we talked about like bead and reel motif was based on a string of beads and how it looked from the side. All of this starts to be just as if architecture itself had vines and had a life of its own. Here we see some more elaborate scroll work and asymmetrical work on the picture on the right, on the picture above my head, quite symmetrical and yet still very, very organic. Here's some more examples. You will see this on everything, even up until today. Some things get invented and will never be supplanted. And so for something that is incredibly decorative, whether it's a printed material like this thing on top or a modern vector illustration like the image in the middle, this is a style that's here to stay when you have certain intentions of how you want your design or your artwork to be perceived. All of this is also one of the hardest time periods and the most impossible styles to represent in the theater, because all of this is extremely time consuming, and you can buy this stuff like this thing above my head. You can just buy that today and you can put it on. But as you can see in this picture on the right, it wasn't just tacked on, it was heavily incorporated into the structure of the thing itself. And so for a building that's going to last 1,000 years, you spend that time because you choose to. But for a set design where you may have mere weeks for a few people to create it, it can be practically impossible. So if you're doing Dangerous Liaisons or another one of those period dramas from this time period, you have to make choices about how to represent these shapes without going against what is needed, but also without going over your budget in the time period that you have. And so sometimes just buying something like this piece above me and placing it on a reduced wall or a flat where the whole wall is only represented by just the door frame, that can be representative of a much larger high detail area. But what would be a poor choice would be to take a blank wall and just stick one of these on it without reducing the wall surfacing itself. Because as you can see, all of this was hand carved. Again, very little to no machine work being done at this time period. And so the vast amounts of labor that were consumed creating this stuff is just completely unspeakable. And our next keyword is Trumploy. It's French for fools the eye. It tricks the eye into believing that something is happening that isn't happening. Trumploy can be used on a very small scale to make things look three-dimensional, or it can be used on a large scale to make it look like at the end of a hallway, the wall is painted to look like more hallway, and it just keeps going. And it's painted so well and so exactly with such great lighting that you believe that that it really goes on. It has fooled your eye. So in this picture, what we're seeing is the absolutely incredible ceiling of a church that has been crafted to appear as if the figures are ascending into the heavens. They didn't just paint a three-dimensional painting on the ceiling. They created these pieces that come down and stick over the decor. Is there elaborately hand-carved pieces that took hundreds of hours to carve behind this piece like there are up here? Probably. But they went beyond that, and they painted this huge, massive mural to look like the story of ascendancy into heaven is happening, which is really amazing. Here's some more Trumploy. So in the picture right above my head, in the left-hand picture straight on, it appears that the apse of the church there has depth to it, right, as you would expect. But on this picture in the middle of our screen, we can see that that entire apse is flat painted. You can kind of discern it, although it's quite convincing. In this picture on the right, I'm not sure if the entire dome, I think perhaps that the entire dome here is completely flat and it's painted. And you can kind of perceive that right here. If you can see where my pointer is, there's a little bit of a pinch, and you can see it a little bit around in other places, but I believe that the entire ceiling between like this arch and that arch is a painting that looks like it goes on. And this practice of doing ceilings that went up further or appeared to go up further is referred to as quadratura. Here's another view on that ceiling with the Trumploy figures ascending into heaven. You can see that it's very extensive. And this was practiced throughout. If you weren't going to do paintings that covered molding, you would do sculptures that were transitioning from this real space to the painted space. Very, very incredible. Here's some more examples of that. So in this picture on the right, it looks like some of the architecture is still going on up above, and then there are figures sitting on a ledge. It kind of speaks back to the pediment of the Parthenon to me, but in its own Baroque way. Our next keyword is chiaroscuro, and this is the use of very bright and very dark elements. And we're going to see chiaroscuro in paintings a lot, but it was also used in architecture. It was used as surface textures and colors, and also in an obsession with hidden light sources and deliberate shadow. So chiaroscuro in this painting is very clear that the main figure is extremely well lit, and at this time they could afford the time to paint something that you can't see very well, which that says something about the period itself. Here's another example of chiaroscuro. And here are a few more examples in painting. So the use of strong highlights for a central figure, very darkness receding into the background to make things three-dimensional, make them pop out, to give a real sense of depth to the painting. But chiaroscuro existed also in architecture, both in color choices and in choosing places to be very bright and places to be very dark. So here we can see that this sculpture is being lit from above by some sort of overhead element, while there's allowed to be darkness below and in the foreground. Here's that same sculpture again. You can see it a little more clearly. And even in this Vermeer, a sort of a mild chiaroscuro is being used here, but there's quite a bit of darkness behind the table and on her sleeves, and you can see the light source from the windows creating a lot of darkness that in previous paintings, Renaissance paintings, not as much as this, right? Our next keyword is curved massing. So in the past, up until now, all of our churches and our big buildings that were the prime examples of stylistic architecture, even when they were trying to put a curved dome on top, they knew that they had to put a square base for the tower, or the main central element of the church would be square. And with Baroque, they brought decor into the main thing. The structure of it is itself decorative. And so curved massing. How useful is a curved room? Probably not as useful as a rectangular room, but doesn't matter. Let's make it all part of this feeling of organic curves and shapes. And so you can see that not just are there domes in these pictures, but that the walls themselves are also curved and the shape of the building is curved. You can see that in these images as well, even to the point that like this dental molding and this entablature is curved, which is not something that we saw much of, if at all, in the classical period. So here's some more examples. A curved room of elaborate detail, and then this building is, of course, both curved in its very dominantly massed tower here, but also that its walls of the whole structure are curved as well. So a building that is not so different from the Pantheon in Rome in its overall shape is in fact quite different with the curved massing that's taking place. Because even the Pantheon, even though it had a huge dome, was like octagonal or something in its massing. And that led to something, this is not a keyword, but it's called an undulating facade. An undulating facade, kind of like waves. And I know these two pictures are of the same one, but I just thought they're worth looking at. The different angles of an undulating facade give you a very different feeling. So just the idea of bringing the curve into the thing itself, the bones of something, having that be of a sinuous line. Gilding is our next keyword, and what gilding is to cover something with a very thin layer of gold. It's essentially gold paper, or even thinner than what we would think of as paper today, much, much thinner, so that it is incredibly delicate. And it is glued and brushed on to make something appear as if it is made out of gold. But you could use a much, much smaller amount of gold to gild something than, of course, if you made it out of gold. And your gate, obviously, you would not want to make out of gold because someone would come along and steal it. And also, gold is an incredibly soft metal that could easily be breached if it was a structural or defensive element. So above me, a putti in gold. And on the upper right picture, a modern practitioner gilding a table. We can see that the thinness of the gold here is key to being able to smoothly brush it onto a surface and pick up the underlying structure of the decor. So if you've got an egg and dart you want to gild, you need to get that gilding, that sheet of gold, down into all those crevices and things like that. So some cheaper gilding, believe it or not, you may see with, or really old gilding, you may see with like a bit of a veinous texture to it, and then they're really great the really great gilding you would see will be mostly flat. And it's incredibly beautiful, and it is also like the most opulent thing of all time, for sure. But it is absolutely gorgeous. Our next keyword is Coppola, and Coppola is the thing on top of the dome that in this picture you can see here has columns, and what you can't really tell is that that's window glass in the middle. And so a cupola is a room or small area atop a dome or tower with large windows allowing light to stream into the space. So the cupola here, both you can see that there are windows back here in the apse, but up here at the top of this picture you can see that the cupola is allowing light in. And because of their obsession with lots of darkness and light contrast, as I was talking about with Chiaroscuro, the cupola would allow this area to be very well lit. And while, look at these areas over here, they have allowed to be quite dark. Did they put some big Gothic stained glass in there? No. That's a darkened area. This is a bright area. That's the choice that they have made. This cupola as well. So in the dome, of course, it's sitting on a tower that has windows in it. But up here at the very top, you can see the cupola is so bright, it's almost blowing out the exposure of this photograph. So they would figure out ways to focus that light downward by painting the inside white and by having the windows arrayed in a certain fashion. It was all about creating a dramatic, theatrical effect with lighting. And the Baroque and Rococo periods both are very, very theatrical in their effect because every choice was made to give this dramatic sensory experience. Here's some more pictures of cupolas. And here you can see the dramatic lighting effect that is achieved. In the center, it is so incredibly bright, and that fades away as you get away from the cupola down to the apse. But over here on the sides, again, quite dark. And you can see what that does to the lighting direction and its effect on these relief sculptures. Our next keyword is Bernini. So Bernini was one of the greatest sculptors of all time, a genius Italian sculptor and architect, painter and theater director, actor and writer. He was the creator of the Baroque style of sculpture and the leading talent of his generation. So in the sculptural works that we've seen before, some of them were quite realistic. But just as Mannerism and Baroque and Rococo went beyond realism, there's an immediacy and an emotion to the sculpture of Bernini that is absolutely stunning. And Bernini is probably, without question, the greatest sculptor of all time. I mean, obviously you could debate this, but if you look at some of his work, so check out how in this picture above my head, the fingers and hands are pressing into the flesh of the leg, and the muscles in the fingers are rippling. Look at the fabric drapery on the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa here. So that would have to be incredibly heavy, and it would have to be a very particular type of fabric to drape that way. But beyond what is realistic, the draping of the fabric in this sort of geometric manner gives us a very harsh impression. And compare it to the draping of the fabric on the figure above, quite different. What is Bernini trying to tell us with that draping? Here we can see the picture on the left where, is it Apollo and Daphne, I think? He's chasing her, and then she gets turned into a tree so that she doesn't have to deal with him. So a lot of elements in Bernini's work that are like other Baroque and Rococo things, like lots of foliage and vinous shape. But his expression of emotion and his expression of detail and his expression of, like in this picture above my head on the left, the idea that you could sculpt translucency is so far beyond anything that had come before this time period. And this picture on the right is such a surprising and full of emotion thing, to the point that even today this would be something that you might see in a meme or something. So his work is known for a passion and for a hyper-realism, if you see reality as full of life and full of verve. Here again, this picture right above me on the left. In this sculpture, probably one of the most photographed hands in all of Western art, because the way that he took a single block of marble and sculpted it so that it had the appearance of motion and tension is one of its kind. Here we see a few more sculptures by Bernini, and the one on the right you can see a very elaborate wreathing, almost like something you would see in a festoon. Lots of natural shapes allowing the structure necessary to hold this sculpture up, and very emotional, elegant poses from the figure. Same with the figure on the left. Dramatic, elaborate use of draping in the fabric and with the hair as well. This sculpture, the Apollo Belvedere, is going to feature in our upcoming virtual Shakespeare production as one of the gold sculptures on the proscenium. And here's a sculpture of a lion. So totally realistic? No, but incredibly detailed, incredibly elegant and dramatic and theatrical? Absolutely. So those are our vocabulary words for Baroque and Rococo. Baroque is a highly decorative and overtop style of the 17th century. Rococo is a late Baroque style that went even further. I will change that later. Scrollwork, ornamentation characterized by spirals and unfinished circles. Trumploy, French for fools the eye. Chiaroscuro, strong contrast between dark and light for a dramatic effect. Curved massing, so reducing right angles in architecture by using round-shaped rooms. Gilding, a thin layer of gold foil applied to surfaces. Coppola, a room or small area atop a dome or tower with large windows allowing light in. And Bernini, a genius Italian sculptor and architect, painter, and theater artist. Thank you very much for being here with me on lecture number 9. I'll be sending out a document about our upcoming major assignment that we have in class, and there's also a quiz. Feel free to contact me at any time with any questions, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thanks.